you considering dropping your well-worn copy of Great Western Trail in favor of the New Zealand version that just came out? Or would you simply rather wrangle sheep than cows? Or are you a rookie to the series and you're trying to figure out which one to get? Well, you're in the right place, because today court is in session and I will be levying a final verdict on whether I'm going to keep my well-loved copy of Great Western Trail First Edition, or has New Zealand added enough to make me level up my game and move on to bigger and better things. So we're going to compare and contrast similarities and differences. First, going to go down the line of all the similarities, because there are some really major ones. Then we're going to go into what New Zealand is doing different, and is it enough to push it over the edge and have me rule in its favor. So first, let's talk about what's the same. The core game loop is really unchanged. You as the player are moving around a trail or map, essentially, landing on buildings, activating and taking actions, using the cards in your hand to pay for some of those actions. When you're at the end of this trail, you're still cashing in unique animal cards for money. You still deliver to cities that are going to unlock points at the end of the game. With that money you earn, you're still building buildings around the map to enhance those actions as you make your way back to market time and time again. You're also still hiring workers. 3 of those workers are functioning in really the same exact way. One, which we'll touch on a little bit later, is a completely new worker overall. There's still the idea of certificates on your player board that you can use to boost the market value of your sale at the end of the trail. And objective cards really work the same way. But now we're going to get into the juicy stuff. I'm actually really excited to tell you about this. When I ordered this game, I really didn't know what to expect at all. I honestly didn't do a whole lot of research into it. I like the setting in New Zealand. The artwork looked a little bit better, more vibrant and bright. It's green instead of grayish. I guess you could call it. But I just really hope that there were some added mechanics that really spiced things up. And spoiler alert, there absolutely is. But before we get into the very best stuff, let's talk about something that's different, but sort of the same. Railroads are no longer. There's no longer the railroad track that surrounds the map, where they were integrated with cities, and if you were delivering to a city and your train wasn't far enough, you suffered a penalty. That's completely gone. It's been replaced by something that's more akin to the Rails of the North expansion that just sits on top of the board. And now, instead of moving a train, you're moving a ship. You're bouncing from island to island. You're placing these storehouses off of your board. Storehouses do a couple different things. They get you bonuses and bonus tiles. Most importantly, they're unlocking ports for you to be able to deliver your sheep to and gain more points, gain more bonuses, all of that stuff. They work really similarly to that Rails of the North expansion. There's some minor differences in the movement constraints in Rails to the North. You really don't have that as you're sailing your ship around. And the way in which you're playing your storehouses, which were branchlets in the first expansion, is a little bit different. No longer is there a dedicated auxiliary action to place your storehouse or branchlet onto the map. Now instead, you have to pay movement. When you were to gain a movement on a ship, instead of moving it, you're placing a storehouse, which I actually really like. In the end, if you've played Rails to the North and you liked it, you're probably gonna like this. And if you haven't, it definitely adds a little bit more complexity to base game. Now a completely new concept, and it's the concept of investing these bonus tiles. These bonus tiles are put out at the beginning of the game, and they're the mechanism that will actually end the game, similar to how workers used to work in the first game. Because each time you make it to the end of the market, you're placing more of these bonus tiles. That's pushing this end game marker further and further down, and when it falls off the map, the game is over. Which isn't necessarily a new concept, but the new concept here are these bonus tiles. They're doing 2 different things. Some of them are straight up bonuses. They're giving you either extra deck building cards, which we'll get to in a second, and be excited. Those are awesome. Foreshadowing. They're also helping you go up on another new track called the Pathfinder Track, or giving you gold, all of which are concepts we'll get to in just a second, I promise. And lastly, there's this concept of Joker workers. So if you can pay the natural cost of the tile and also 1 gold, you can gain this worker. This is a wild worker. It can go anywhere and take the place of any worker on your board. A really great mechanic when that perfect worker is just not showing up in the market. Speaking of gold, there's this new gold track on your board. You start with 1 gold. You can get gold through a variety of ways, but why is it important? Number 1, gold's important to be able to qualify yourself to get these Joker workers. But in my mind, the best use of that gold, or my favorite use of that gold, was buying these deck building cards. And, oh, these deck building cards, they're so good and so fun. Ugh. I don't want to spoil the ending, but this is a really great addition in my mind to the game. You see, these deck building cards have a variety of effects throughout the game, and that's not the good part, because when you draw them in your hand, you play them for that immediate action or bonus, and then you get to draw a new card. You can play as many of these cards as you want in a turn. This really helps to cement the feeling of deck building, hence the name of the card, in this game. If you've ever felt in the first edition that this really truly wasn't a deck building game per se, as much as you're adding cards to your hand, there was not really great mechanisms to make you feel like you're doing something great with these cards as you built this awesome deck. This is that solution, because no longer is your deck just comprised of cows, or in this case sheep. It's now comprised of these cards. They do things like giving you money, increasing your certificate marker, upgrading buildings automatically from one level to the next. Like when I saw that card, I was like mind blown. That one felt so good to use. The other cool thing is there's a variety of them each game. You don't use all the different cards each and every game. There's a couple core staples that are always out, but through the setup process, you're also selecting from a variety of these deck building cards. So each game will have a little bit different feel depending on which cards are out there. I can't stress enough how this changed the feeling of the game for me. This is a core difference that in my mind totally separates itself from the original. Oh yeah, and I mentioned there's sheep, right? So sheep function much the same as cows. You're trying to collect unique higher values that you can cash in at the end of your run, be able to gain coins and qualify yourself to place your discs on cities that will give you in-game points. Not changed at all. But the other really big component that I love in this game is the shearing mechanic, because each one of these cards not only has a market value on the top, there's a secondary value connected to the wool. And when you shear a sheep, you get that value. So it's simply you're discarding the sheep as if you were at the top of the market. However, this happens in multiple actions as you're going up the map. That's really exciting because you can build a sheep shearing strategy where you are turning through your deck your entire trip on the way up if you're hitting multiple of these spaces, or you're building buildings that allow you to shear more sheep. Much the same as selling your sheep off at the end of your run, they have to be unique sheep. One other wrinkle is as you're buying sheep, some sheep have a lower market value, but a much higher wool value. So that lends itself once again to a totally new strategy in this game, and one that makes this game feel really, really good. I honestly can't imagine not wanting to play a heavy wool strategy because it feels so good to turn through that deck. If I'm hitting multiple spaces, I'm turning more and more cards in to be sheared. I'm also drawing up more of these deck building cards that I just found. Like, oh, it feels so good. That hit me about halfway through my first game where I was like, oh, okay, that's why this is different, and that's why this game is special. It leads me to that aforementioned new worker type. There is now a shearer, and on certain spaces, you'll be able to shear the number of sheep equal to the number of shearers that you have hired. And the last difference is this Pathfinder track. You can go up this track through various actions on building tiles, bonus tiles, as well as some deck building cards. And this track will give you a couple really great things. It will give you some gold. It's also the only way to maximize your movement throughout the game. In the old game, there were 2 discs that you would remove during market selling actions. In this case, there's only 1, and the other bit of movement is tied to going up on this track. If you're one of those scoundrels that want to bum rush this game and accelerate its ending, I guess that's the track you want to go up on. If you get high enough and choose to, you no longer have to pay the penalty on going over green or black hands, which is great. Alternatively, you can flip that movement tile to a +2 instead of a +1. And lastly, it's a really good amount of bonus points at the end of the game. So not something you really want to ignore. All right, so what's my verdict? I have to say there's some things I don't like about this game. Setup is significantly increased in my mind. Now, I've only set it up a couple times, and I know that stuff gets a little bit easier as you're not having to read through the instructions, but there's some finicky parts around the deck building cards, picking out only a certain amount of them, including only a certain number in each pile. It definitely added to the time in which it takes to set this game up. Your player board has increased number of bits on it. I will say both of those things will be helped with a quality insert. The insert looks okay, but it doesn't function very well, in my mind at least, for setup. I want those deck building cards filed away in slots so I can easily pull them out. I can easily complete the setup process. I want my objective cards totally separated, and there's one recess slot that could be for buildings as well, but really is where you shove in all of your bits. I want player trays so I can get this game set up as fast as possible, because I don't want any friction stopping me from getting this game to the table. The other thing that's kind of a problem is table presence is literally enormous. I thought Arnak was vertically a really tall game. This thing is absolutely a behemoth. And not only that, you're also adding sheep cards at the bottom of it, so that footprint gets even longer. And then on top of that, you know, it's not particularly wide. However, you're adding deck building and objective cards on each side, really lining the entire board all the way down. It is a large table presence. So if you don't have a really large space, it could be difficult. We have to put it sideways, slide to the end of it, and put our player boards at the end and kind of have to reach around the board, which is fine. We play a lot of games like that, and it's not going to stop me from playing this game. It's just something to note. And the only gameplay critique I really had was with the Pathfinder track. To me, it almost feels bolted on. Now, the bonuses on it are great. They're definitely things that you would want to go after, but it doesn't necessarily seem like it's an organic addition to the game. I wonder if it has to do with balance and there's something I'm not seeing there. It could be early on in my journey with this game, but it's just the one thing that kind of felt out of place. Absolutely not a disqualifier to stay in my collection. Just something else to note that I just didn't click with as a really fun mechanic to use. All right, so the things I love. First off, I like everything else in this game. Literally all of the additions that I went over, and there's some other small that I didn't, all of them I like. There's a couple that I love, and I think you could probably already guess what they are. It's that deck building component, and it's the shearing component. I love deck builders, and this game didn't always scratch the deck building itch. It still doesn't fully feel like it has those deck building combos, but it absolutely finally feels like a deck I'm building that I'm turning through and trying to get through as often as possible, especially if I'm shearing a lot of sheep. And lastly, I just like that there's a lot more to explore in this game. There's more complexity, which some might not like, but for me, that's what I love. And especially when everything but the Pathfinder track, it all feels organic and feels important and feels fun to use. Each turn feels really good when you're turning through that deck, and that's why I gotta keep it. I'm giving it the Neon Gorilla stamp of approval. Am I gonna get rid of first edition? Probably not. I think that's going to be a nostalgia piece that I'm keeping in my collection forever. However, I'm probably going to be begging my wife to play this one with me and not the first one. So if you made it this far, I really appreciate it. I'm working really hard on this channel right now. I'm trying to pump out as much content as I can while keeping the quality level up. If you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. I really appreciate you. And on that note, I'm out.